Hi, and welcome to the Raw Heart and Soul podcast. This morning I have with me Craig Harper. Craig's been in my realm for, I guess, 15 years or so. I first heard about Craig, about 15 years ago, and we'll get into that a little bit further in. Welcome, Craig.
Hi, Tanya. What's going on?
Lots of stuff is going on with me. Lots of stuff.
Look at you. You're a podcaster now. You're like a grown-up.
I know, right? I know.
Wowza.
Yeah. It's been a big year for me, and this has been one of the things that COVID has brought me that is, I'm really proud of.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. Well, you're doing good things and you're helping people and a bit of teaching and coaching and supporting, all the good things.
All the good things. Tell us, what have you been doing recently? You just said before you've just finished your degree or your uni year.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that. You said you're still in front of.
Yeah, so I'm doing a PhD, and some people will be familiar with the process, but for those who are not, a PhD is not like an undergrad degree where you have terms, semesters, exams, assignments. You sit in a lecture theatre with other students. It's all self-directed, independent research. So you are essentially a researcher for 4 years or 3.5 years. And you have one big project that you create, that you design, that you execute. And you essentially, as I'm doing neuropsychology which is in the realm of neuroscience. So you essentially identify what you believe to be a gap in the science where something is missing or something is incomplete or something hasn't been developed or explored enough, and you dive into that. But at the end, as I said to you before we went live, at the end of the first year, which for me was a few weeks ago, you stand in front of an academic board. It's kind of like going to court, and you tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing it and why it needs to be done, why the world needs this science and why you're the man or woman to do the job. And, a whole lot of, like what your study design and your protocol and your methodology and your numbers of participants
and who you're going to study and how you
all that. It's like a big bloody rigmarole, academic rigmarole, but
lots of red tape. And
at the end of that, they either go, you're kind of on track, but you need to come back in a few months and represent, or they go, nah, not really, see you later, or they go, yep, proceed to go. So fortunately for me, I got the green light, which was really nice. And so now it's head down, bum up. And 2.5 years of kind of 40 hours a week of just designing and developing these things. So I'm doing a thing called external self-awareness without boring anyone, which is essentially you understanding the you experience for others. And so what that means is you having an insight into what it's like being around you. So if you're a teacher or a mentor or a coach or a specialist or a consultant or a mum or a dad or anyone who interacts with anyone, really,
relationships,
it's having an awareness of how other people see you so that you can create connection and synergy and teamwork. And, people who don't have any idea of what they're like to be around tend to create more disconnection than connection.
How did you see that gap in the market, or how did you, not in the market, I guess in the science world, like where did you identify that? Because I know that you started out earlier this year and you had a couple of different ideas, didn't you, when you were going into it? How did this one become the one?
So I started off looking at motivation. So I believe motivation is that what we call motivation, which is that state of motivation, which is elevated, emotion, excitement, arousal,
physiological change,
but also mental and emotional, where we go, you're right, physiological, but also, I'm in the zone.
Yeah.
But that I'm in the zone lasts about 5 minutes to 5 days, depending on the individual. So
3 seconds.
I've always been interested in how do we create sustained change and sustained behavior and sustained progress in the absence of motivation. Because it's in other words, how do we be behaviorally and practically consistent amid the inconsistency of the emotional thing that we call motivation? So that I spent the first 3 months of my PhD on that, but it became very apparent that there was just way, way too much confusion and contradiction around believe it or not, even the definition of motivation. So when we in, say, health and wellness and fitness are talking to people about, you know, changing their life and becoming healthier and more functional and whatever, changing their body comp, and we talk about motivation, we're talking about inspiration or excitement or focus, or but in academia, motivation is essentially analogous to the word reason. So what that means is, you know, Craig's motivation for getting out of bed was to go to work, to pay the bills, to feed his kids, look after his family, and be a good human husband, blah, blah, blah.
Fit into society. Yep.
Yeah. Craig's reason was it's the same. So the word motivation is essentially the word reason.
Yep.
And that's in science, but in the real world, when people talk about their motivation, quite often, if not mostly, they're talking about how excited or pumped or focused. You know, I went and I heard Tanya speak and I got all motivated. Or I watched the Australian Open, I'm motivated. Or summer's coming, I'm motivated. And they're talking about how they feel. But the genesis for ESA, external self-awareness, was really just my experience working with lots of leaders and coaches and managers and CEOs who seemed to have no idea of what it was like to be around them. So what happens is, when you've got a very low level of external self-awareness, you might think that you're giving somebody inspiration and direction and positive feedback, but what their experience of you is judgment and criticism and unwanted negativity. And so it's not about, you know, remember that the human experience is subjective. And so let's say, for example, right now you've got, and you've heard me say stuff like this ad nauseum, but, you know, if we've got 1,000 people listening to this over time, they're listening to the same guy and the same girl talk about the same issues. It's the exact same stimulus, but nobody's having the same experience.
Yeah.
So that begs the question, well, what creates my experience? And maybe even more deeply, what creates my reality? And a big part of the answer to that is I do.
What would have happened had you gotten up on Monday and they said, this is all bullshit, start again? How would you have approached that?
Yeah, they wouldn't say start again. They'd say no, see you, or they'd say come back and work on these things. But whatever the outcome, I would have dealt with it. And I, you know, for me, I had no expectation. Like, this is not, you know, without trying to sound silly, getting a PhD is not easy.
No.
It is the opposite of easy.
Yeah.
This is the hardest thing I've done in the last 20 years. And I've done lots of hard things in the last 20 years. But that's all right. Lots of people do it. And I don't need, you know, any approval or accolades, but it's just for me at 57, who hasn't been, the last time I was at uni was 18 years ago. And, you know, so it's a long time out of study. I've never really been a researcher, but as a PhD in science, you are a researcher. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But I just would have managed it. You know, if they had said, come back in 3 or 4 months, we need you to address these flaws in your presentation or your hypothesis or your model, then I just would have done it. You know, what else are you going to do? You're either going to give up or you're going to go back and do it. And
take on the feedback and the critical feedback and see where you can improve from it and what you need to do to go forward.
Well, I think that's the thing, is we're all flawed, and we're all, you know, for me, I'm not extremely talented or extremely smart or extremely gifted, and so for me, and that seems like a handicap, but I actually think it's a blessing, because when you are not amazing at stuff,
the expectation is low, is it? Or,
well, no, but oh, sorry about that. But what that can do is it keeps me humble. You know, because I don't think a lot of me, that doesn't mean self-loathing, but I don't think I'm amazing or spectacular. It keeps me grounded. And that insecurity and that self-doubt is always about 3 seconds away, you know, so, and this is just part of the human experience. Like, sometimes people would look at me because I do a lot of big events and run lots of things and written books and done lots of cool stuff.
Own gyms and coach people and mentored.
Yeah, worked on telly, worked on radio for 20 years, 3 years on national television, all that really fun, cool stuff. But I can tell you every time I worked on telly, every time, and it was live, it wasn't pre-recorded,
Yeah.
I felt like a fraud.
Yeah.
Intellectually, I knew I could do it, but emotionally, I still felt like the fat kid from Latrobe Valley,
Yeah. Yeah.
that insecure, overthinking 14-year-old that I was, so that kid is never too far away for me.
And that keeps you grounded?
Yeah.
Yeah. You brought up the subject then about fraud, and you've talked about this. I've heard Paul Taylor talk about this as well, and I'm not sure where I recently heard it, but I heard someone saying, it's not the fraud, it's the feeling you get up on, like when you get up on stage and you shouldn't be there. What's that?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. That people who have, like, I think everybody experiences imposter syndrome at some stage, but the people who tend to experience that more, and this could be completely wrong, but it was just an interesting thing that I heard. People who experience that more tend not to have known where they've come from. They kind of know when it's at the start of their journey where they want to go, but they don't have this plan. And I know, and you know, with coaching, that oftentimes you throw the plan out the window. But if you've got a guideline, the people who get to the end of that and are doing the thing that they wanted to learn how to do tend to be able to look back and go, yep, I followed the plan and those were the points and I can see where I've been. Whereas the people who kind of think they know where they want to go and end up there, look back and go, holy shit, how did I get here? And their imposter syndrome tends to be bigger or more overwhelming than someone who has known the plan. How would you feel about that?
That's interesting. I mean, I've probably been more like the guy who ended up here, although obviously I have a plan, but for me, a lot of the things that I've done have come through incidental moments in time where, like I did my first radio interview, I don't know, 30 years ago, and then another one not long after. And I went, radio's fun. How do you get into radio? So I went, oh, I like this. And then I went and I did literally 4 years of community radio for nothing, being obviously not paid, talking to essentially no one, but learning how to do radio. How do I get, here's the thing, you can't get good at the thing that you won't do.
Yeah.
Right. And so, for me, I love communication and connection, and whether that's writing, whether that's podcasts, whether that's live audiences, whether that's Zoom mentoring programs, whether that's a whiteboard lesson on my social media, whether or not that's talking to some bloke who's having a shit time at the cafe, I'm happy with all of that. And, right now we're blessed because we've just got more flexibility and more options and more platforms than ever to be able to connect with people, as long as we know what it is that we want to say and not just be heard for the sake of being heard. And I think there's a lot of people that want a platform, but they don't really have their own voice. What they do is they have, echoes of 27 other people's voices and ideas and philosophies. But I think it's, as a teacher and coach and mentor and all of those things, that you got to listen to other people, you're going to learn from other people. But at the same time, you need to find your voice and your ideas and your theory and your philosophy and share that uniquely with the world, so that you're not just some parrot that's just, mouthing somebody else's ideas or stuff. And that, so that, for me, all of the majority of my learning has been experiential and face-to-face, and making mistakes and failing and getting up and failing and then winning and then failing and learning. And, I employed over 500 people. I had businesses that were great, businesses that didn't work. I did speaking gigs that were mind-blowing. I did speaking gigs that were terrible. It's just, this is just life. This is the tapestry of experience and being human. And the more stuff you do, good or bad, you're going to learn something in the middle of that.
Yeah. Do you think your attitude to how you learn, and like you just said, you learn or you succeed and then you fail, that continuing cycle of, I guess, winning, losing, is the more accepting of that, the more you embrace it? Because I know for me, I have grown, particularly in the last year, through my challenges, more when I have failed. And when I look back in the last couple of years at my what I consider big failures, the business closing and things like that, I can now go, actually, it's not a failure because I learned so much from it that I'm implementing now. So do you think that people who accept that they are going to fail succeed more quickly or succeed better?
Yeah, I know where you're going. The answer is yes, because, and this is very cliche, but, everyone who's somewhere between pretty successful and mega successful has had 100 failures. But again, as you said, sometimes it's reframing. It's like, I've done things that didn't work. And you could go, well, that's a failure. You could, or you could go, no, I just got clarity. I got clarity. I figured out that's not a thing I want to do. And it wasn't even a bad experience for me. I've done things where I lost money. I've done, I did a speaking gig not that long ago where it was just before Christmas. It was for an organization, a small organization. A guy followed me, was a fan of my stuff, and he had this small business. And as part of that, he wanted me to speak at his Christmas function, which was fraught with danger. But anyway, so I'm like, oh, okay, it was like at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday or something. So I rock up and I go, well, it can't be too bad. And I was being paid pretty good dough. It's 15 minutes away. I'm like, no worries. I'll turn up and talk a bit about life and inspiration and getting stuff done as I do. And by the time I got there, half the audience, there was probably 80 people, but so they're all sitting, it's in a restaurant that's dimly lit. They've got the whole restaurant. The floor's sticky because it's had 1,000 beers spilt on it. The whole joint stinks. It's I can hardly see anyone because it's so poorly lit. I start talking and everyone's eating food and half the audience have got their back to me. And 20 of the 80 people are talking quite loud, and 10 people are paying attention. It was just the worst environment and the worst situation to do what I do. And about 10 minutes in, this drunk 60-something lady just goes, who is this bloke anyway? And she stands up and she goes, what are you banging on about? Right, to me. And so I just
in the middle of your presentation. Yeah.
So I just keep soldiering on. And anyway, I go, oh, well, and I'll beep, and I'm just inside. I'm just
dying.
I'm not dying. I'm angry.
You just want to be out there. Yeah.
I'm angry. I'm not dying. I'm angry because this is ridiculous. Yeah. And the guy who'd organized it didn't say, hey, everyone, pull your head in, just have a listen. Like, he'd organized it terribly. Anyway, it was all fun. But so then they kept talking, and then she said something like, the same lady just yells out, this is ridiculous, or you're boring, or something. So I'm 20 minutes into this 1 hour thing, or this, I don't know, 40 or 50 minute thing. You. I pick up my keys and my wallet, which are next to me. And I go to the bloke halfway through. I go, mate, I'm done. You can keep your money. See you later. And I walked out. And I don't look back on that with pride. I probably could have handled it better, and I didn't crack the shits but he walked out and he's like, oh, what are you doing? I go, mate, you're kidding. You're kidding. I go, this is not I don't talk to drunk people in a restaurant on a Wednesday who don't listen, who are passing the chips and the salt and it's not what I do. I go, maybe somebody else does that. I don't do that. Like, I'm a professional speaker. You keep the money, tell everybody, sorry, you didn't want to do it, whatever, keep the money. I'm going home, all good.
Yeah.
And then he called me unprofessional. So you can imagine that went well.
Yeah.
So then we had a moment. But what I learned out of that was, and it wasn't all him, by the way. I was part of
the expectations and how that was managed prior to that event. Like how, go, you tell me.
Yeah, but so what I learned was, okay, so don't do gigs where people are drinking alcohol. So I have a rider. And what that means is a proviso. I won't speak at events where people are drinking alcohol, just because it doesn't work. It doesn't create a good, and I don't care what the fee is. Yeah, I can't talk to drunk people. I'm not a stand-up comic. We're not doing, hey, funny thing happened on the way to the gig.
Yeah.
Like, the stuff that I talk about is deep, and I want to have a laugh, and I want people to enjoy it and all of that stuff. But at the same time, if you're competing with piss blokes from table 7, it just ruins it for everyone.
You might as well
So
go to the
what's my
football.
point? My point is, in the mess and the failure and the discomfort and the hard stuff, I've had businesses that didn't work. I've had, numerous challenges where in the moment you go, well, this sucks. But the bottom line is you really learn what not to do and how to be better. And at least half of the time, the problem is me, and I'm aware of that. And so you figure out, okay, what did I do wrong? How do I need to be better? And this is,
It's going back to the eye experience, your PhD.
yeah, this is self-awareness, awareness
Yeah.
of self. What am I like for others? Self-awareness is literally being able to have an awareness of your thoughts and feelings, your reactions, your values, your biases in the moment, in the moment when you're with someone. It's not easy, that's for sure. But I believe a lot of us just live this life kind of on autopilot. And for many people, it's an autopilot that isn't really working well.
Yep. Do you think, or have you seen that people need to be at a certain level of health to be able to take this stuff really deeply? Because when you start asking these questions, and I've done your mentoring program at the beginning of COVID, so I did, and have gone through this stuff, and Timothy did it last year with you as well, my son. So I started to question myself earlier than that, but it takes a lot of thinking and being incredibly honest to take yourself out of yourself and try and experience or get that feedback from people, because you have to be really vulnerable to do that. So
Definitely. And
do you think their level of health? So when I coach people, there's certain steps that I go through within, because I'm a Czech practitioner. If I can't get their brain unclouded or unfoggy, so there's certain things. So water is one of the first priorities, because I know that I can change their food, or they can change their food. I can change their exercise. We can start talking about the mental, emotional stuff. But if they haven't got the clarity in their brain to be able to comprehend that and to go on the level that I need them, or get to the level that I need them to get to spiritually and emotionally, I'm wasting my time. So with people, when you are talking about this, about being aware of themselves and being self-aware, do you think that they need to have a certain level of health, or have you seen they need to have a certain level of health to be able to absorb that information and start really getting deep with themselves?
That's an interesting question. And I would say, without being evasive, sometimes yes, and surprisingly, sometimes the opposite. I think sometimes it's how broken are you and how desperate are you? Like, how bad is your life?
How big is that crisis that you're having?
I've worked literally in addiction for 3 years in an addiction treatment facility as the director of health. And one of the mantras is that many, many, many times for addicts, they need to hit absolute rock bottom. When they are at their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual least healthy, where there's no way but up, they're either going to capitulate or turn it around. And so sometimes it's easier to make that decision when, even though that's not the decision you want to make or is comfortable to make, it's not as bad as where you are right now. So there's a bit of both, but one thing I think is really interesting to point out right now is that in general terms, people seem to, again, I'm generalizing, not everyone, not all the time, but many people wait until there's a problem or a catastrophe or an impending catastrophe before they step into their power, potential, and possibilities. That is, they are reactive, not proactive. And I've spoken to, I don't know how many people, many, maybe thousands, but definitely hundreds of people over the years who have done incredible, mind-blowing things with their life and their ability and their talent and their career and their energy after they nearly died or after they had some horrendous experience. But the interesting thing is, before that horrendous thing, all that potential was there. All that talent was there. All of that ability to do these things was there. The hours in the day were there. It's not like, oh, you had, like I had a girl on my podcast recently called Michelle Ericello, who,
isn't she beautiful? Yes.
yeah, amazing. And she had a leg cut off instantly by a car in an accident. So it's called a traumatic amputation.
Yeah.
And she would say in her own words, from being just a typical average girl, in inverted commas, politely, to being this animal. I mean, this killer, this the girl who never did sport, and then
when competed for the Paralympics.
Well, she broke a world record within 18 months of having her leg chopped off, and she was told she would never run. She competed at the Olympics. She broke 2 world records, one in the 100 and 2. And I mean, it's just like that thing is there. But what's not there for many people is the mindset, because we are, especially in 2020, we are so addicted to pleasure and instant gratification and the right nowness of this bit of food or this bit of alcohol or this bit of couch or this bit of comfort. And there's no judgment in that, but it's like, you know, when you say to your listeners, how many of you would like to be more resilient mentally and emotionally? I'm thinking everyone goes, well, me. How many of you would like to be physically stronger, you know, in better shape, blah, blah. Well, most people are going to go me, you know,
how and then you do that work though?
Yeah, then you go, well, how does that happen? Well, it doesn't happen by eating shit and drinking shit and living on the couch and crossing your fingers. It happens by immersing yourself in the pain.
Yeah.
It happens by immersing yourself in the work and the discomfort. And in the discomfort, you build strength, resistance, endurance, aptitude, skill, and all of those things.
And that goes back to showing the brain and proving to your brain that you can do the hard stuff. So if you haven't had to prove that you can do the hard stuff, you sit on that autopilot. Whereas if you train your brain to be able to go do the hard stuff, that it knows that it can do the hard stuff.
Definitely.
And that you build up that resilience to, it's not a resilience. You don't build it up because it's always hard. It doesn't change. It doesn't stop. And this is what I have found in the last year or so. Just because you're doing the hard stuff doesn't mean it gets easier.
Well, see, hard's relative. So when I say to, you know, like when I was 14 and 93 kilos and morbidly obese, I went for my first 5K walk run a day after I was completely humiliated, which was my own doing, nobody else's fault. And I would say those 5Ks took me an hour. And then the next day a bit less, then the next day a bit less. And when I started to actually run, I remember when I ran my first 5Ks, which was maybe 4 weeks into it, where I didn't stop, the pain was a 9.5 out of 10. But 6 months later, I could run 5Ks at twice the pace and the pain was a 3. So we change our relationship with that stimulus. And so pain is subjective and discomfort is subjective and it's malleable. And so over time, the thing that was once, you know, it's like, I do this quite often. And this is like I do this for the exercise of proving to someone how we can change our state and how we can change our physiology and our experience in a very short period of time. And often when I have a whole day with people, I'll say early in the day, I'm talking about, you know, subjective nature of being human and how the stories we tell ourselves turn into physiological responses, you know.
Because we believe what's going on.
Yep. I'm in danger. Therefore, your blood pressure believes it, your heart rate, your adrenaline, all
and
that
everything
stuff.
follows. Yeah.
And so I go, put up your hand if you're terrified of public speaking. And I go, you don't need to worry. I'm not going to make you do anything. And by the way, I'm totally lying. I go, put up your hand if you're terrified of public speaking. A few hands go up. And I'll pick someone and I'll go, can you come out the front to me? And I go, it's all right. I'm not going to make you speak to the group. It's okay. And so this person who's terrified of public speaking comes out. I go, I don't even want you to look at them and you're not going to talk to them. You're just going to, is it okay that you talk to me?
Yeah.
And they go, okay. Yeah. I go, don't look at them. Don't worry about them. Right? They're all bullfeds anyway. I put them at ease. And I go, so where'd you come from today? How'd you get here? Yeah. Oh, I drove. Where'd you come from? Oh, I came from Sale. Oh, wow. That's forever. How long does that take? Oh, it took me 4 hours. Wow. You must love me, you know, or you must be desperate for, you know, and I have a conversation with them and I go, how you doing? And they're like, oh, all right. And I go, so you've been talking in front of an audience for 60 seconds. You know that, right? And they're like,
speaking.
Yeah, I'm speaking. You're on a stage, you're speaking, and there's 400 people listening or whatever it is. And I go, hey, you did well. Cool. Sit down. Well done. You didn't die. And then they sit down. And then 2 hours later, I bring them up again. I go, let's have another chat. And I go, all right, all I want you to do is tell these guys 15 seconds where you went to school. And they turn around and they go, well, primary school, I went to da-da-da. Secondary school, I went to da-da-da. And then I go, all right, and back to me. And I talk to them. I bring them out 5 times through the day. And by the end of the day, they're talking to the auditorium comfortably.
Yeah.
Right? So same day, same human, no more talent, shift in cognition.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't master the thing you avoid. How do you overcome fear? By stepping into the fear. You don't overcome fear by reading a book or listening to a podcast or wishing.
Or watching
you
on
overcome,
YouTube. Yep.
You step into the thing that scares you, and then you go, oh, okay, so I'm here, I'm scared, but I'm not dying.
Right.
And instead of it being a 9, next time it's an 8, next time it's a 7, next time it's a 6.
So do you continue then, Craig, to put yourself in those positions? So I know that doing the PhD, you've talked about that, was stepping outside your comfort zone, stepping into that fear.
Yeah.
Are you always looking for the next thing to do to keep your growth happening?
Yes, but not like I'm getting up going, right, what dragon am I going to slay today in terms of my improvement? No, but I go, like everyone, for example, when I had about $700,000 worth of work fall over this year in terms for my company, for corporate gigs, for public workshops, for the stuff that happens under the banner of the U Project, which is not just my show, but my company. Yeah. And so, like everyone else, I needed to go, like, I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to stare at a computer screen. How can I create connection with people that I can't hug or touch or talk to or squeeze their cheeks or see their body language, or do you know what I mean? It's like, for me, for me, there's an energy. There's an energy exchange in a room, and I'm big into that. And I'm big into, looking people in the eye. And then you go, well, guess what, Harps? That's not an option. So shut up.
Yeah, it's taken away from you. What do you do now?
Yeah, well, so that's not an option. So stop sooking. Oh, all right. Well, let's try a few years ago, and I stepped it up to 30-on-1 mentoring.
Yep.
So I got a little space, as you know, I think. And I just, so I would do 6-week programs, 30 people. So it's pretty private. It's not like there's 1,000 people. And anyway, so Melissa said, who runs my life, who's very tech savvy, who's got a double degree in psych and business, way smarter than me, not hard. Let's run a Zoom program. And I'm like, how does that work? I'm like, oh, I don't know. How does that work?
I'm not technically minded, as you say.
Yeah. So anyway, the first one we ran, we literally we didn't spend 1 cent on advertising. We just promoted on social media. So there was no, as the cool kids say, there was no marketing spend. And we had 330 people for the first one. And I'm like, oh my God, how long has this been going on? And so, you learn, and I've become, my skill and my awareness and my competence at doing this, being interviewed on Zoom like we are right now, interviewing, because obviously you can see I'm in my studio, and I've got a, $30,000-$40,000 studio in my house for doing podcasts that I can't use. And so all of my podcasts, 4 or 5 episodes a week, have been via Zoom, and you adapt and you go, oh, actually, this is, not only is this okay, sometimes this is even better. Like yesterday I had Nick Seymour from Hunters and Collectors on, and Nick Seymour's not coming to my house with his guitar. But yesterday I had Nick Seymour in his house playing me the guitar and singing songs. And you're like, well, if not for Zoom, this is not happening with this guy. And you go, wow, what a blessing. So yeah, for me, I don't just do it because I want to keep pushing the boundaries. I do it because I actually really love learning. Like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, a friend of mine is have you ever heard of a religion called Baha'i?
No.
So there's a religion called Baha'i. It's Bahai, me either. So one of my really good friends is a Baha'i, and I'm like, what's that about? And he's telling me stuff, and it's like kind of cool. It's only 150 years old, the religion, and I'm not particularly religious. I was once, but I am particularly curious.
Yes.
And he goes, oh, there's a course you can do, which it's not a conversion course. It's just like information. I go, when's that? He goes, Wednesday night. So I'm in. So right now, for no reason other than curiosity, I'm doing 8 weeks learning about this thing. Am I going to go and evangelize the world and join? Yeah, no, but what I'm doing is I'm learning.
Yeah.
And for me, Like there's so much of all there is to know. I know virtually nothing. And when I'm interested in religion, I'm interested in spirituality.
Yeah.
I'm interested in culture. I'm interested in the way that people find their identity in their group or their tribe, and people become, sometimes way more functional, sometimes way more emotional and irrational and, borderline psychotic and defensive, and so I'm interested in all that stuff. And so for me, if there's an opportunity to do something, which I definitely probably shouldn't be doing this group because I don't have time, but it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. And there's no exam at the end, which is awesome.
That's awesome. What do you think, what parts of your childhood prepared you for what you are doing now?
I think because I was without trying to sound like the broken record, but I was the fat kid that wasn't a good athlete, that wasn't a good student, that was, probably had not a bad personality and a bit cheeky, and just kind of fluffed my way through a lot of experiences and situations by being a little bit cheeky and charismatic, um, without having too many other skills. But also going through, like, literally from when I was about, I would say 7 or 8, pretty much all the way through school, most people called me Jumbo, including many teachers and parents and coaches, because I was a fat kid. And that was obviously pre-political correctness. But, and it sounds funny, but it wasn't, for most people, it wasn't actually being nasty. It was just, I was just this
That's how
fat,
you were
chubby.
known.
I was this fat, chubby little kid that people call Jumbo. But when your fat body essentially becomes your name, then you ain't having, in the middle of that, you ain't having great self-esteem.
Yeah.
You're not thinking too highly of yourself. The self-talk is not awesome. And so from that, I had a few experiences which were, as a young kid, in the context of a relatively comfortable upbringing and all of those things. But for me at that moment, like all kids have, a couple of challenges, like a couple of really painful, uncomfortable moments in my evolution as a young man and as a young, at that stage, teenager, which were for me life-changing and defining. And so, I kind of, part of that, when I said I started to run, the genesis for that was, and you've probably heard this 20
The
times,
swimming
but
pool. That's okay.
is
My
being
audience might have.
being humiliated in front of hundreds of people doing the swimming sports. And, I don't know what I was then. I'm about 5'9" and a half or 10 now, but I was probably about 5'6" and over 90 kilos. Today I'm 83. So that gives you a context of how chubby I was, and having to stand on the swimming blocks and not wanting to, and literally being dragged over there by my sports teacher. And the only reason I could actually swim quite well. The only reason I didn't want it was I didn't want people to look at my body. I desperately didn't want anyone to see my body because I always covered up.
Yeah.
And obviously you have to
in those days, you wouldn't wear your t-shirt in the water like they do now. Yeah.
No. Oh, that wasn't even an option. So
yeah.
But that for me became, but then, I started to run and I started to train and I lost all this weight and I got strong and I started to train as an athlete. I started to play footy properly, not just turn up and sit in the back pocket, but, and prepare as much as I could like an athlete. And I became, for my limited ability, I became reasonably okay. I was probably at one stage the hands down the fittest kid in my school by far, not because I was genetically gifted, but because I trained 7 days a week.
Yeah.
I was, when I was 15, 16, I was running 70 kilometers a week every week and doing 1,000 push-ups, 1,000 sit-ups and 100 chins a day. And that was it. That was 365 days of the year. So I was a maniac.
How do you think that relates to your coaching and your ability to empathize with people now? Because you've been in that situation, do you think that you understand them from the other side as well?
100%. When I'm talking to people, it's like I'm talking to myself, because I understand the body dysmorphia. I understand the self-loathing. I understand the food issues. I understand the shit self-esteem that comes with all of that. So, when I'm talking to somebody, I see myself in them. And even now, people think, oh, because you've done you're older and you're a bit wiser and you've done all these things and whatever, that therefore you must have all your shit together. And it just isn't true. Like to a level, you are much more, like I'm more in control than I've ever been. And I feel more functional and healthier than I've ever been from a mental and emotional perspective and a behavioral perspective. But do I still have self-esteem issues? Sure do. Do I want them? No. Are they there? Yes. Do I still think I'm a fraud? Sometimes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do I still have issues with food? Yes. Does it manifest behaviorally? No, it doesn't. But I've learned and developed an operating system that works well for Craig Harper. But all that underlying stuff, it doesn't cripple me or control me, but it's always there. And I think most, if not all, people are going to, as long as they're alive and functioning, they're going to have a level of insecurity, self-doubt, overthinking, poor self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
But what's possible is, for us to coexist with that.
Yeah.
I recognize all that emotional stuff in me and it doesn't bother me because intellectually, so there's the emotional experience. Oh, I'm not good enough. Then there's the intellectual awareness. Well, actually, I've done this 10 times and I was okay. So it doesn't make sense that I'm not good enough story because I know I am good enough. But nonetheless, the knowledge doesn't take away the feeling always, and so
we're both sides of that. Yep.
So the intellectual certainty can coexist with the emotional uncertainty.
Where is Craig Harper most vulnerable? When do you feel really vulnerable?
I'm much better at being vulnerable. I used to be really, painfully concerned with what people thought of me. And
Mm-hmm.
I was a people pleaser in that sense. And, when I was 33, I had 5 businesses and 100 staff, and I had 3 gyms, 2 other businesses, bricks and mortar businesses. So 5 in all, 100 and something staff, 1 million moving parts, full-time PA, all these things going on.
Self-perpetuated?
All of these things, pardon?
Self-perpetuated?
Yeah. Yeah. All of this stuff. Yeah. All from the ground up.
Mm.
And all of this, and from the outside looking in, I was incredibly successful. Well, relatively for the fat kid from Latrobe Valley, I was a success
You're doing
story.
good.
Yep. And making lots of money. All my businesses were in the black, lots of dough. I was writing for the Herald Sun. I had a profile. I had the biggest personal training facility in the Southern Hemisphere. Regularly interviewed in the media, all these cool things. And in the middle of all of that, I was miserable. I was emotionally and mentally and spiritually bankrupt because I was living through the persona, not the person. I was being what I thought I needed to be to tick all these boxes, to comply, to survive, to thrive, to meet everyone's expectations. And so,
but not meeting yours in the middle of that because you didn't know what they were. Yeah.
100%. So for me, I had a moment, and I've spoken about this a few times, but I'll keep it brief, where I hit the pause button on my life, my work, my everything for 10 days. I went away to Queensland by myself. I didn't talk to another human for 10 days. I didn't read a newspaper. I didn't read a book. I didn't take a phone. I didn't look at a computer. I didn't look at a television. I didn't listen to anything. I only listened to that. I call that still small voice that's just whispering to me all the time that I tend to shove out.
Yeah.
And for the first 2 or 3 days, I desperately wanted to come home because I hated what I was hearing and feeling.
Yeah.
I was sad. I was anxious. I was embarrassed of who I was, even though other people thought highly of me. I was living out of alignment with my core values.
Yeah.
And by the 10th day, I didn't want to come back. And I kind of discovered myself a bit. And, it's always a work in progress, but I came back and I sold all my businesses except one. I sold all of them within 6 months except one. And then I went to university for the first time and I studied a degree in exercise science. I was completely inept. I had no idea. I was way out of my depth for the first semester. Second semester, slightly better, and then kind of figured out what I was doing. But I went from making lots of money to not much money, and my happiness went from not at all to hugely happy and satisfied. And it's just been, for me, I'm happy being vulnerable. I'm happy being vulnerable. Sometimes I put myself out there and I say things Like with my PhD, I feel incredibly under-equipped or ill-equipped and underqualified. And so I've spoken about it a fair bit publicly because I want people to realize that, well, if this 57-year-old dude can do this, he can start this after 2 decades out of academia. And by the way, didn't do honors, didn't do masters, gone from undergrad to this. And I got a, depends. You can get kind of a dispensation because I've done lots of stuff, written books, run businesses, run events, employed lots of people. They kind of go
prior credit.
Yeah. But so it's in the middle of all of that. And, but I'm happy to tell people when I fail and what I learned in the failure. I think that's human experience.
And being vulnerable with it. Yep. We talked a little, we haven't talked yet. You've touched on it a couple of times, spirituality. Did the experience that you went through with your best friend, the crab, change you in any way? And did it heighten your sense of spirituality? So do you want to explain a little bit about what happened? Because I know that briefly, but my audience probably won't.
So I was training with my training partner, Mark, aka the Crab. We call him the Crab. And just over a year ago, we were training, and he did a set of chins, and he has this bad habit of holding his breath while he's really exerting himself. And he did 30 chins. And I don't mean 13 chins. I mean 30 proper chins, ex-Mr. Australia, ex-pro bodybuilder, extremely strong.
Without breathing.
So his blood pressure went to 1 million over 1 million, and he came down and he had a cardiac arrest, not a heart attack, cardiac arrest. Heart stopped completely. And so he was dead by the time he hit the floor, pretty much he was dead. And I thought he was having a seizure. Anyway, so I started working on him straight away. And fortunately for us, the paramedics got there. It wasn't that quick, but could have been worse. They got there about, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes.
Which feels like a lifetime when you're doing CPR.
Feels like 8 and 10 hours. And anyway, they started working on him, but he was still gone for 17 minutes. So he was dead, flatlined for 17 minutes, came back. And now he's all right. So that's good. But it didn't really, no, I've always been fascinated with, because I grew up in a religious culture, like very religious. So I was interested in life and death and what happens when we die, if anything, and religion and rules and theology and bureaucracy in religion, and more broadly, spirituality. What is there other than this physical universe that I can see and touch and feel and understand and comprehend and measure and do science on?
Yep.
And I've always been, for me, spirituality, this is how I explain it, that for me, so my spiritual platform is love. And I believe for me anyway, that's when I come from a place of love and service, all the expressions of love, service, service, kindness, support, tolerance, sometimes depending on what you're tolerating, quality time with people and all of those things, then I'm a better person. And I tend to, as a great byproduct, do better physically, mentally, emotionally. Everything works better when I'm coming from a place of Craig. It doesn't work, and I tried that for a long time. When I'm selfish, which I'm very good at being selfish, it doesn't work, right? And so for me, there's been times when, and I grew up praying because I grew up in a Catholic environment. Then I became a born again Christian. Sorry, everyone. The tambourine banging, rafter swinging, you name it. Pick a thing that fundamental Christians do. I did that. So I was in the middle of that for quite a while. I was preaching up the front of church when I was 21. I was leading Bible studies when I was 20. I was
fully immersed.
I was fully immersed. I was evangelizing the masses who all needed to
be
born again. But what is interesting, and a lot of people get out of religion and go, oh, that was, it's like, you know what, for the most part, it made me think deeply and reflect deeply. And whether or not it's the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or whatever it's called, or the Bible or the Baha'i scriptures, or there's just a lot of great stuff in terms of how to live. There's a lot of there's just a lot of amazing wisdom and insight that I learned. I'm not a big fan personally of religion, but I'm a fan of love. I'm a fan of kindness. I'm a fan of understanding others. And, so it,
If that formulates itself in religion, and the people who are practicing that are have found that in the religion, there might be nothing wrong with that religion. It's
of
the way
course,
it's interpreted.
I think it's the byproduct. I think it's the, if you're running around trying to make people be like you and think like you and believe like you, that's not good.
And that's the Craig experience again. That's not being aware of your experience or others' experience of you.
Definitely. So I think spiritual things, and again, like I kind of like talking about this and kind of don't, because I feel like all my scientific friends would be like rolling their eyes going, come on, Harps, but I don't care because this is what I believe.
Yep.
I think there's way more things, way, and I'm just not just talking about science. I think there's way more things that happen to us and around us and in parallel spaces that we have no idea what's going on. But because we humans are quite arrogant, we think we understand the universe and most things, but I believe we don't understand most things. I believe we understand less than 1% of what there is. Yeah. I think we, and what we do is we say things, oh, that doesn't make sense. But what we're really saying is, I don't understand that. It doesn't make sense to me, with my knowledge, with my training, with my academic, it doesn't make sense to me. And that's okay too. I understand that. But one of the problems is that people's identity becomes very intertwined with their alleged knowledge and their beliefs. And when you question people's beliefs, most people will get very defensive because their beliefs are essentially who they are. And I understand this, but let's bring it back to the religious thing. If you go, all right, well, my religion and what I think about God, or what I think about eternity, or what I think about life after death, or what I think about spirituality is unequivocally right. This is my belief, and I believe I'm unequivocally right. And what you're also saying is, I believe everyone who doesn't agree with me is 100% wrong.
Yeah.
Now, for me, that
it makes no sense, because there's so many people in the world. How can you be the one that is right?
And so when people say to me, I go, I don't know. I really don't know, but I tell you what I feel. Yeah. And by the way, don't agree with me and don't jump on board the Craig train. So I know that sometimes when I told this story the other day, but just quickly. So not last year, the year before, we did a conference at Deakin. So I once a year or a couple of times a year, I use their lecture theatre because it seats 670.
Yeah.
So we had 670 people. It was a Sunday morning, and it's like church, really. Anyway, it was from, I think it was from 10 to 1. And what I often do is, because I've been speaking for so long, there's a danger, for want of a better term, that you can go in because you know your stuff, you can be a bit charming and funny, you can tell stories, you've got experience, you've got lots of miles on the clock, you've got lots of skills.
What's worked in the past for you.
You can go in there and just do it. And you can be a rock solid 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
But sometimes you go in there, and sometimes I say a little prayer or a little dedication or whatever you want to call it, where, God, if there's a God, whoever she or he is, or whatever that means, if it's divine inspiration, if it's love, if it's, whatever.
For you. Yeah.
I just go, I want this to be all about them and not about me. I want this to be an experience for people that, not because of me, but because of what goes on, could be truly transformational. I want whatever the wisdom, whatever needs to be spoken, whatever they need to hear, I want that to come through me, not from me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I go and I step in that space, and I am in a good place mentally and spiritually, I am in a good place, and I open that door. So this particular year, I prayed before I went in, and I just felt this overwhelming peace and calm. And so I spoke for 3 hours without notes, and it felt like 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of it, I had over maybe 150 people in a line waiting to talk to me, hug me, thank me. We had I would say nearly everyone in the room at some stage cried through the day, laughter, people hugging, strangers hugging. There were, breakdowns, breakthroughs. It was just beautiful. And it wasn't about Craig Harper. And that's not me deflecting. That's me going, I know that wasn't about me. There was something going on in that place. There was some energy. There was some force. There was some divine something that was going on that was healing and that was therapeutic, that was far bigger than my skill and my knowledge and my ability to string some words together. And so for me, and that, if you said, Craig, you could do that each time and make $0, I'm choosing it.
Yeah.
I'm choosing it. Or you can do the one over the road for $5,000, but none of that. I'm choosing the $0 because it doesn't compare to anything else.
Yeah. So my podcast is based on speaking to people about their soul purpose. Do you think that's what your soul purpose is? To be the vessel by which that sort of energy comes through?
Did you say soul purpose?
I did say soul purpose, yeah.
I think that's part of it. I think I feel like I'm a good encourager.
That's such a good term. That's such a good way to put it.
I feel like I'm good at encouraging people and supporting people, but also being the unreasonable friend. Like I always tell people, I tell people they've got way more talent and power and possibility and potential than they're tapping into. But I also say, but by the same token, at the same time, don't surround yourself with people who tell you what you want to hear. You don't need a fan club. You need resilience. You don't need a cheer squad. You need courage. You don't need someone patting you on the back for doing something that you should just do anyway. Like this is part of the problem in our culture, is that every time somebody does something, they want to post about it on Instagram because they want everyone to give them a round of applause. And that makes you weaker, not stronger, because now you depend on that. Yeah. And when you don't get enough attention and enough accolades and enough approval, now you're depressed. So what I care about,
external. Yep.
What I care about is what you do when no one's looking. That's what I care about. And what you don't tell people. The great stuff that you don't tell people about, the amazing shit that you do that you don't brag about, don't talk about. You don't need people to tell you you're okay. And if you do need people to tell you you're good enough all the time, that's a big part of the problem. The challenge for us is not to manage our life as much as it is to manage ourselves in the middle of that life.
That's awesome. What do you want people to take away from this podcast in terms of the Craig experience?
Here's the thing. Podcasts are great. Personal development in inverted commas is great. Books are great. All this stuff's great, but none of it's you changing your life. It's all just words and ideas and theories. It's all just people talking to you, at you, about you. If I said something today that resonates, don't start telling yourself a story about why today is not a good day to start, because you'll wake up in a minute and you'll be a year older and you'll be going, oh yeah. Because the thing is that changing our life, habits, attitude, thinking, behaviors, outcomes is inconvenient. It is uncomfortable. It is uncertain. It is unfamiliar. And guess what? They're all the things that we don't like or want, which is why the silver bullet, the magic pill, the quick fix, the instant gratification sells so well. But none of that shit works, which is why people keep looking for the next thing, the next magic pill, the next this or that. But when you stop looking for the instant gratification and you go, you know what? This won't be quick, fun, easy, or painless, and I'm okay with that. That's when your journey really starts.
Very good. We're going to wrap it up, but I wanted to say thank you for being here today, but also I'm going to get emotional now. Thank you for giving me or showing me the potential in myself to be able to do this.
Pleasure.
Because it scared the fuck out of me to do this podcast to start with. And I procrastinated for about 6 months until another friend said, I dare you to. And then everything that I had been doing prior to that, through your mentoring and through other things that I was doing, manifested, and I just took the step.
And you're doing it. And I'm proud. And I'm not pissing in your pocket. I'm proud of you. And why I'm proud of you is because you're doing what scares you.
Yeah, and it does.
when you do what scares you, you're putting on your big girl pants and you're going, I'll have a crack. And if I fuck up, I fuck up. If it goes great, it goes great. But either way, I'm learning and I'm changing. And
I know that I've tried, and I know that I've done the best that I can do with that.
How do you become a good podcaster? By doing podcasts.
Yep.
That's it.
Yep.
There's no other way, so, and you were great, like really good questions, really good interaction.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Craig.
Thanks to your audience. See you, team.